Well, there are tough times, kind of those times when just nothing seems to go right. You just kind of just don't know anymore what in the world's going on in your life. Why am I here? What's going on? You know, you're in some kind of uncomfortable situation. Maybe it's one of those deals where your past is jumping up and smacking you in the face, and it won't let you understand that there is something better out there for you and that you can achieve it. Sometimes it's some kind of financial hardship that you just have no idea. You've been working your tail off, but you cannot figure out how you're going to make ends meet. You don't know when the next meal is coming or when you're going to be able to get out of the hole that either you've dug for yourself or it's been dug for you. Or sometimes it's just something that is so heavy on your heart, it's emotionally traumatic for you, and you can't really explain it to anybody else, and nobody understands, and you just feel like you're being crushed under the weight of it. That happens to all of us at some point in our lives, and it's disheartening. It gets us down. We just don't know where we're going to find the strength to go on for the next day. And I'm going to tell you right now, and it kind of goes along with what Johnny Erickson Tada had said, and it may sound cold and callous, but you know what? I'm happy for you. I'm glad you're going through that tough time. It's part of what's supposed to happen for you. But let me explain. I mean, this life that we live, especially as believers, and I'm going to go ahead and throw a disclaimer in here right now. Today's message is for believers. If you're not a believer, it's still relevant to you. Don't get me wrong. But you don't have enough fear or anxiety or worry or discontentment in your life. Because every second you're not doing the greatest, feeling the best, everything else is wasted time for you. It is. It's all wasted time for you because what you've got in the here and now is all you've got. So if you're not a believer, this message will have some relevance for you, but it's really not going to bring you much hope. But brothers and sisters in Christ, we do have some hope in this. Because we're living a life that is basically a story that was written before the beginning of time, right? It was authored by God. And your character, your specific character, the place that you're supposed to be, the role that you're supposed to play, was designed by Him, and your storyline is His. Now, tomorrow's a new day, and today's failures aren't final. Our stories all have a happy ending for those who love God and are willing to yield to His direction. I'm sure every one of you, I know you do, every one of you out here has watched a bunch of movies, a bunch of TV, right? And this is kind of how it plays out when you turn on that show. You see the main character, they kind of get defined as to who they are, and then about 30 seconds later, the show's over, and they're walking down the beach with, and they lived happily ever after splashed up on the screen, right? And then they fade to black. That's it. Every show is about 30 seconds long, and it's always just this full of nothing but positivity, right? No way. No way. It'd be boring if that was it. There's a struggle. There's a challenge. There's some bad guy. There's always something that confronts the main character and steals their joy. Otherwise, there'd be no point in watching this movie. There'd be no entertainment value in it, and there would be really no storyline. It would always be the same. There's always some outcome that they're looking for where they have an obstacle that they've got to get over to reach it. Now, here's something that you may not have thought about. Every one of you, every one of us, is a main character in God's story. We're all in these little subtitle things that are going on, or little side stories that are going on in the main story. God's got a role for us to play. We've got roles to play and dragons to slay, so to speak. We've got things that He's going to have for us to do that nobody else can do. It's our character to play, but He's the one that designed the role for us. And the hard times, they're kind of the necessity in our story. There need to be challenges in our lives. We're built that way. We're wired that way. When men and women, thousands, tens and thousands of them, maybe millions of them, when they don't have enough challenges in their lives, they go out and create them. I mean, they climb Mount Everest. They adapt a Jeep to drive up some mountain. They cliff dive, skydive, bungee jump. I mean, they invent things that haven't been invented yet so they can get the next big challenge in their lives. It's something that's kind of designed within us. It's something that we need to do. Life would be boring if there was never a challenge going on in our lives. So the things that don't happen for us on their own, we create just to have that challenge. And then there's people like me that are just enough of a challenge trying to remember where I left my keys last night when I got out of the truck. But that's kind of what goes on in our lives. It's a boring life without the challenges. And we need difficulties in our lives for no other reason than we need them as a measuring stick, right? Let me ask you a question. What is the definition of good? It's the absence of bad, right? I mean, isn't that what it is? Okay, well, what's bad? It's the absence of good. So you never know how really good something is or how really bad it is unless you know how much of the other thing you don't have, right? So you've got to have something to measure up against. You can't have a good day if you've never had a bad one. And you can't have a bad one if you've never had a good one. There's just no definition of how the things aside from each other. Now, if you want to take a look, we've got some biblical resources we can look at here. And I could. There's a Chiefs game today. People probably want to eat. I could go through here and go story after story and verse after verse, and there's hundreds and hundreds of them. But I'm going to touch on about 3 of them this morning. If you want to look at stories of adversity in the Bible, we can start with the story of Joseph, for one. I mean, you want to talk about a roller coaster ride. This guy gets sold into slavery by his brothers. Then he starts this rise to power. Then is imprisoned, forgotten about, only to be raised back up by the providence of God to become the leader of Egypt so that he can save the very family that threw him into slavery in the first place. And then there's David. You know, here's this little shepherd boy. He's overlooked by everybody. He's dismissed as just being a child when he kills a giant. He gets overlooked by the prophet Samuel when God sent him to anoint a new king for Israel. And then he receives the glory of being anointed. And what happens? He has to turn around and run for his life because Saul's trying to kill him. He lives out of caves and in the wilderness and everywhere else. And then one day he finally becomes king. And he's remembered as a man after God's own heart. And then there's Elijah. And that's the one I really want to touch on. He's a prophet of God. And he really gets his big break, his big notoriety when he challenges the prophets of Baal. Now there's 450 of them and one of him. Their gods against his God. And he challenges them to a contest to see whose God is the true God. And you guys probably know the story. They each slaughter a bull. They put it on their altars. The prophets of Baal try to get their God to light the sacrifice. And they try all day and all night, and the whole time Elijah's kind of trash talking them. You know, talking about, hey, maybe he's asleep. Maybe he went to the bathroom. Keep praying to him. Well, they pray all day and they get nowhere. And then, in kind of what I think is kind of a really trash-talking, smart-aleck gesture, he not only takes his sacrifice, but he has them pour water all over it and all over the wood and build a moat around it and everything else and fill that moat up full of water. And then he prays to his God, the God of Israel, and God lights the whole thing on fire and consumes all the water, takes care of everything. So then, he's got the attention of the people of Israel, and God hands over the 450 prophets of Baal, and then he goes out and slays every one of them with a sword. But within 24 hours, he's witnessed this incredible power of God, and within 24 hours, he's forgotten who he's working for. Because the king's wife, Jezebel, finds out that he's killed all of these prophets of Baal. And what does she do? She puts a price out on his head. So he takes off and runs. And he runs for his life, and he takes off, and he goes out into the desert and gets as far away from everything and everybody as he can. He lays down on the ground and prays for God to let him die there so that he doesn't get killed at the hands of Jezebel. But then an amazing thing happens. He's just walked through the desert nonstop. Now, I reread this last night, and it just blew me away. The first time he's laying there in the desert after he's been begging to die, God sends an angel and gives him some bread and some water, right? And then he goes back to sleep. Then he wakes up the next day at the hand of this angel waking him up again and says, look, you got a big journey, you're going to have to eat. So he gives him some more bread and some more water. And then he walks for nonstop for 40 days and 40 nights before he ends up at Mount Sinai, where he slips into a cave there. I don't know what kind of bread and water that was. Everybody talks about that like it's a bad deal, but if you can walk 40 days and 40 nights nonstop after 2 meals of it, give me some. But let's turn to 1 Kings 19, verses 9 through 13, because this is the part of the story that just blows me away every time. 1 Kings chapter 19. The last part of verse 9 into 13. This is after he's gotten into the cave and been through this 40-day, 40-night journey. Then the Lord spoke his word to him, Elijah, why are you here? He answered, Lord God, all-powerful, I have always served you as well as I could. But the people of Israel have broken their agreement with you, destroyed your altars, and killed your prophets with swords. And I'm the only prophet left. And now they're trying to kill me too. The Lord said to Elijah, go stand in front of me on the mountain, and I will pass by you. Then a very strong wind blew until it caused the mountains to fall apart and large rocks to break in front of the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, there was a quiet, gentle sound. And when Elijah heard it, he covered his face with his coat and went out and stood at the entrance to the cave. Now, I think this is a great illustration of some of the trials that we face. You know, even though the wind and the earthquake and the fire are all creations of God and they can be used by His hand and His discernment at any time He'd like, those were the things that destroyed everything around Elijah, but God wasn't in any of that. You know, He revealed Himself to Elijah in a whisper. In a still, small voice is probably how you've heard that said before. That's some of the literal translation of what it is. It's translated that way in various translations of the Bible. It's a tiny, very almost inaudible whisper is how that is translated from the original text. You see, He doesn't have to use all these powerful things, because what we don't understand oftentimes is that the power of God begins simply with His word. And He doesn't have to shout them in order for them to have the power that they have. You know, difficult times are a part of our lives. We saw it in the life of Elijah. You know, there's a saying that says, Mama said there'd be days like this. Well, guess what? So did God. He put it in His Word. He tells us that in several different places, but I'm going to just use this one verse for today. And it's James chapter 1, And a couple of verses here, 2 through 4. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. And it really describes the fact that he's told us we're going to have trials and how we're supposed to respond to it. James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. You know, where does your faith lie? Where is it? Is it in what the world defines as good? Is that where your measuring stick is? Or is it in the knowledge that the God of all creation and eternity has a script for your life? And you're living that script out in His perfect timing. Now, can He send down some fire and burn some things up? Yeah, He can sure do that. Can He deliver your enemies into your hands and let you do with them what you want? Sure, He could do that too. Can He make your pitcher of oil, like in the story, never run dry? Boy, He could sure do that, because He could do anything He wants. Can He part the Red Sea? He can do all those things. Absolutely, He can do those things. He has the power. He has the authority. Those are all within His grasp. But guess what? That's probably not your story. That's somebody else's story. We read about Him in the Bible. That doesn't mean that He can't do those things for you, but it's probably not your story. So what is the answer? How do we cope when times get tough? I mean, and our situation seems like it's hopeless. Well, let me start by asking you a few questions, and these are not rhetorical questions. I'd like to hear you guys answer them for me. Do you believe there's a God in heaven? Do you believe there's a creator of all things? Do you believe that He knows and loves each one of you individually? Do you believe that He knows your needs even before you ask? Do you believe that He wants what's best for you? Do you believe that all things work together for good for those who love the Lord and are called according to His purpose? Do you believe He is all-powerful? Do you believe that He is actually in control? Okay, if the answer to those questions is yes, then our answer for what we've got to do is we've got to wait. We've got to wait patiently on the author of our story to turn the page for us or take us to that next chapter. We've got to yield ourselves to His will. And you know what? Sometimes we're going to forget our lines, and that's okay, because just like in a Broadway play, He's right there with the Holy Spirit to whisper our lines back to us in that still, small voice. We've got to get real quiet, and we've got to listen, because He's going to do that for us. I'll use the phrase, we've got to let go and we've got to let God. We've got to get ourselves out of the way, and we've got to pay attention to what He has to say for us. And we've got to get quiet and let the rest of what we want to do get away from our attitudes and our minds, so that we can listen and respond to what He has. You know, we got to remember that God told us we're going to have some trouble on this earth. But here's the deal, and this is where I go back to what I said at the very beginning. If you're a Christian, if you believe in God, then you know the end of the story. You know your end of the story, right? Sometimes we try to go off script and we can try to do it all ourselves, but God, that doesn't mess the author up. He'll still get us to the end, the way He sees it ending. When He decides to call us home, our worst day there is going to be immensely better than the best day here. The trials we got to go through are just temporary. But again, if we're going to claim these truths, we got to be His. We have to play the character that He's designed us to be, right? Not some. If you watch these actors, a lot of times they'll try to redefine the character, right? Or they'll put their spin on it or whatever. That can't happen in God's story. We can do that, and we can't screw it up bad enough he can't fix it, but that's not the role he has for us to play. We've got to accept the role he's given us, and we've got to play it within the situations that he presents us with. We need to be who he wants us to be and not who we think we want to be. And when we do yield to his direction, we begin to become the character he has always meant for us to be. Author C.S. Lewis, and just that guy's just so deep, on so many levels. But he has this quote, and it really hit me hard. He said, "The more we let God take us over, the more truly ourselves we become. Because he made us. He invented us. He invented all the different people that you and I were intended to be. It is when we turn to Christ, when I give up myself to his personality, that I first begin to have a real personality of my own." You know, tomorrow is a new day. But we don't have to wait till tomorrow to get back on the right script. And I'd suggest that you don't. You know, your whole perspective about life's challenges really do change when you realize that these momentary discomforts that we are going through are all planned ahead of time, and so's our reward. And you know, in God's time and in God's wisdom, we really end up, if we follow through with the script that he's written for us, with the best feel-good story ever. It really does end up that way. Well, you know, there's more tough times ahead. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We're going to go through some rough patches. And hopefully the rough patches make you appreciate the good days even more, or maybe even redefine what a good day is for you. I know for me it does. People ask me how I am every morning, and I'll say, I'm real good. I woke up on the right side of the sod this morning. You know, and as long as I'm here, everything's good. God's good all the time. Sometimes we don't see it, but he is. Well, let's go ahead and go to the Lord in prayer, and then we'll close it.